The Hinterkaifeck Murders. An overview. One of the most horrifying and enigmatic historical murders is the Hinterkaifeck Murders. In this case, a whole family and their maid were brutally murdered in a remote farmhouse in rural Germany in 1922. Signs after the murders suggested that the murderer or murderers may have been residing in the house where the bodies were found for a few days, which is what makes this crime so unsettling. Both paranormal investigators, armchair detectives, and true crime fans are still plagued by the unsettling facts of the Hinterkaifeck murders, and the case is still unresolved. This story is a terrifying blend of unsolved mystery, spectral rumors, and actual crime. The horrific circumstances of the killings, the subsequent investigation, and the spooky aftermath that still plagues the Hinterkaifeck farmhouse today will all be covered in this in-depth narrative. The mystery of the Hinterkaifeck farmhouse. Situated in the rural Bavarian region of Germany, the Hinterkaifeck farmhouse was secluded from the closest town by miles of farmland and thick forests. The family lived and worked on the small, self-sufficient farm, largely in seclusion. The family included the 63-year-old patriarch Andreas Gruber, his wife Cecilia, their daughter Victoria, and her two children, Josef, age 2, and Cecilia, age 7. In addition, there was Maria Baumgartner, the family's maid, who had just moved in. Andreas had spotted some odd things going on around the property in the weeks before the murders. He found footsteps in the snow that led to the house but not back. Additionally, he heard sounds coming from the attic, but he was unable to identify the source. At the time, no one gave much mind to these odd indications, and his family disregarded them. However, unbeknownst to them, these episodes were merely the beginning of a horrible chapter in the history of the Hinterkaifeck farm. The horrible murders. A horrible crime occurred at the Hinterkaifeck farmhouse on the evening of March 31st, 1922. All members of the family, including the maid, were brutally murdered. The murders had been committed by the killer or killers using blunt weapons, such as a pickaxe and a machete. Every victim was hit in the head several times, and the crime scene revealed that the murders were carried out methodically rather than in a fit of wrath. The killer initially hit the father, Andreas Gruber, who was discovered in the barn. Inside the house, his wife, Cecilia, was killed. Victoria, the daughter, and her two kids were murdered in their chamber. The maid Maria Baumgartner was discovered dead in her room. She was most likely the last to be killed. What made the murders even more disturbing was the fact that the perpetrator appeared to have lingered several days at the farm after committing the murders. In the days after the murders, neighbors claimed to have heard odd sounds coming from the farmhouse, but nobody began to realize there was a problem until April 4th, 1922, when neighbor Lorenz Schlittenbauer visited the farm to look into it. After several days of not hearing from the family, he had grown worried. The study. A terrible truth was revealed to the police upon their arrival at the crime scene. The murderer or murderers had been residing in the farmhouse where the bodies were found. They discovered that the farm animals had received care while the family had been deceased. They had restocked the food supply and maintained the stove fire. This implied that after carrying out the killings, the murderer had been hiding in the house. Signs of forced entry into the farmhouse were also found by the authorities. Nevertheless, no obvious signs of a break-in were discovered, and the doors were secured from the inside. The perpetrator must have had access to the residence without the family's knowledge, forcing authorities to investigate the idea that the murderer might have been someone the family knew. The fact that a set of footsteps led to the home in the snow, but no traces led away from it, was a particularly unsettling clue. This implied that whomever killed the people might have remained around the farm for a few days following the assaults. But how did the killer survive? Had they hidden in the attic or some other section of the house? What was their motive, and why didn't they run away? The families, previous conflicts. One notion that was put up was that the murderer had a personal grudge against the Gruber family. It was known that Andreas Gruber had a number of personal problems, such as disagreements with residents of the neighboring village and financial difficulties. The most well-known suspect was Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a farmer from the area who had dated Victoria Gruber in the past. Schlittenbauer had even been the father of Victoria's kid Josef, though this was not commonly recognized at the time. Investigation suspicions were generated by Schlittenbauer's actions. He appeared to be too familiar with the house's layout and was among the first to arrive on the scene. Several detectives were skeptical because he too showed little emotional response to the gory scene, particularly if there were personal conflicts or a potential inheritance at stake. Some community members even thought Schlittenbauer might have had a reason for the killings. Schlittenbauer was never accused with the crime, though. Although detectives could not rule him out as a suspect, there was insufficient evidence to connect him to the murders. The potential for an outsider. Another explanation raised the possibility that the murderer was an outsider who had exploited the family's seclusion by lurking in the woods around the farm. The fact that the perpetrator had been allowed to remain in the house after the murders was unusual, but not wholly impossible. The mansion was rather huge, and it was simple to envision someone hiding in an attic or a basement without being spotted. The unexplained footsteps in the snow that led to the house but not away further confirmed this notion. The likelihood that the murderer had hid in the nearby woods and taken care to leave no evidence was taken into consideration by investigators. The theories of paranormal. Not surprisingly, given the case's enigmatic character, many individuals started attributing supernatural forces to the Hinterkaifeck killings. In the weeks preceding the killings, the family's own peculiar experiences, such as the unexplained footsteps and sounds in the house, fueled suspicions that the land was haunted. The murders were interpreted by some residents as a sign of a curse that was placed on the land. Despite the lack of concrete proof to back up the paranormal theory, the farmhouse's creepy atmosphere and the crime's unsolved status make this case one of the most terrifying in history. The repercussions and legacy. True crime fans and paranormal investigators are still captivated by the case of the Hinterkaifeck murders, which have not been solved. The farmhouse became a symbol of sadness and mystery when it was abandoned following the murders. None of the explanations that have been put forth have been able to provide a conclusive explanation for the crime. The farm was transferred to a new owner in the years after the killings, but it was finally left fallow and deteriorated. The mansion was eventually demolished in 1923, a year after the killings. The Hinterkaifeck farmhouse still stands in a solitary, barren area of the Bavarian countryside, yet the killing's legacy endures. One of Germany's most notorious and unresolved crimes is still this case. Conclusion. A terrifying enigma. A sobering reminder that sometimes the most eerie and enigmatic crimes take place in the most remote parts of the earth are the Hinterkaifeck murders. The murder's savagery, the disconcerting evidence that the murderer had resided among the dead, and the fact that the crime has not been solved all add to the case's unnerving quality. The Hinterkaifeck killings are one of the most puzzling and horrifying unsolved crime stories in history, since detectives are still unable to determine whether the murders were the result of a crime of passion, an outsider with a cunning plan, or something much more evil.